Hi, my name is Munira Tabassum Ahmed. I'll be reading an excerpt from my novel, The Clinging Thing. This excerpt is one that I read at WestWords Live a few months ago, and it's from the beginning of the book. Prologue. Safia never really learnt how to swim. She was 10 going on 11 at the end of that summer. The air conditioning hadn't worked in 4 months. This was fine for late August, but a few days into a lethargic December, the townhouse was retaining enough humidity to make napping the only viable midday activity. Safia had learnt to shut the bedroom door, fix an old pedestal fan to her face, open the window yet keep the blinds closed. Fresh air could circulate, but the harsh sunlight would remain sequestered to the windowsill. At this age, she was easily lulled by white noise, nearby construction coupled with the dull whir of her fan's blades at full speed. Rabia, her sister, was barely 8 months old. Her mother was giving her a bath, carefully testing the temperature of each scoop of water she ladled onto the gurgling, writhing baby. Rabia's babbling was growing more meaningful. She'd point to her mother amidst long, repetitive strings of the ma syllable. Her aunt, Ikra's mother, was set on Rabia calling her Kala. She hadn't been successful at this yet, but Rabia would smile at her and ramble her las. Safia was asleep by then. In the years to follow, she would begin to tell Ikra what happened next, but she'd realize over and over again that the truth of the day was inaccessible to her. It wasn't hidden somewhere in her memory or occluded by fear. Her life would always contain this hour-long, dreamless, knowledgeless void. She never heard the sound of her mother collapsing, body suddenly soft and malleable against the unyielding tile. She would never know her mother's final words. Her mother, a woman who believed that her words and her daughter's would be the only things to outlive her. Attempting to fill in the absences was a merciless exercise. There was no blood staining the grout beneath her mother's head, so she must have lowered herself slowly. Safia imagined her mother, regaining a transient consciousness, trying to push her own limp body up from the floor to take Rabia out of the bath. It would be a helpless endeavor, mourning your own body as it fails to answer you, while mourning a daughter you couldn't save. When Safia woke up, only minutes too late, she did all the right things. She opened the door and lifted her sister from the shallow bucket. She called the ambulance and waited at the door with Rabia, cold, wrapped in a blanket. Safia didn't talk much about family. Even at the funeral, the first one she and Ikra had ever been to, they talked about the weather and school. It rained just after the burial, one grave so much smaller than the other. The raindrops saturated the earth above Rabia's face, some reaching the white cloth over her brow in bitter endurance. Everyone showed up. The town was unpeculiar in this way. Seam River overlooked its namesake, a body of water that darted left to right as though it was stitching the land together. The river was inland, branching from a larger river and running beside it down the state until it took a sudden turn westward and flowed into a lake. The town was formed in the center, at the midpoint of the original branching and the mouth, dark green forests circumscribing it. Ikra's mother, Safia's aunt and now guardian, stuck with Safia through the small crowd. Many of the neighbors had immigrated to Australia around the same time as Safia and Ikra's mothers. They would bring over food and apologize in Bangla to Ikra's mother for not visiting. They would speak briefly in English to Safia, even when they knew she could speak in Bangla as well. Your mother was a good woman. I'm sorry. She loved you both. I'm sorry. They were uncertain of how to explain their love for this woman, though she was only meant to be in Seam River for a year until she could afford to live in the city again. They were uncertain of how to sit here, living and moving and continuing to mother their children in front of Safia. In the weeks to follow, there was an uptick in swimming lessons and a surge in pool fence installments. They had all heard Rabia drowned. They knew there was no swimming pool, no backyard in need of a fence, barely 7 centimeters of water, but the truth at the center of all this action was a recognition that safety was permeable. It was the imperfect seal of cupped hands. Ikra and Safia would visit the aquatic centre on Saturdays and stick to the walls on the shallow end. No one said anything about it. At some point, after watching her peers swim with ease for months, Ikra gained the idea that swimming was straightforward. As Ikra's mother left for the bathroom, she told both children to avoid any silly business. The instructors were great at their jobs. They had always watched the students well, but Ikra and Safia were never of any concern. While Safia left the pool with loose change to spend at the canteen, Ikra stepped out and walked down to the deep end. At 12 years old, she could comfortably gauge 2 meters as the size of her bedroom door, but that translated poorly underwater. She slinked in, feet first, both hands on the wall. By then, Safia had returned, walking along the shallow end, hot chips in hand and chicken salt coating her fingers. Ikra called out her name and Safia ran over, unsteady on the damp concrete. "What are you doing, Ikra? You're going to get hurt." Before Ikra spoke, she dipped further into the water. "Relax." She let go of one hand. "Everyone starts at the deep end now." "No, please stop." Safia's voice was frantic, though Ikra tried to ignore it. "Maybe just wait for your Amma." Ikra was submerged before Safia could continue. Ikra had never been good at opening her eyes in a chlorinated pool. Even without sight, she understood that in an instant she had inherited a languid body, one that was rapidly turning into water. If she stayed here long enough, her fingertips would shrivel and prune, her voice, unused, would begin to atrophy in her throat, and spontaneously, at any moment, her body would flood and spill. Or maybe, like prayer, there would be a structure to her desperation. She could lay out each organ to transform, and her fear would be the final viscous. To turn into water would be to recall the first language of being, perhaps the last. She had no words for the feeling at the time, but this was a memory of motion. How a river will continue the path it remembers to the ocean even as man paves over it. How God proclaims that the seas will burst forth at the end of the world. She would go on to remember the strange, tender silence. The water muffled the noise of people nearby and dampened her own desire to speak. At the same time, she grew aware of how much air was in her lungs, how there was no ground beneath her feet even as she sunk deeper, how her flailing was making less of an effect on the ever-stilling surface. Safia's outstretched hand broke the tension. Perching half her body over the edge of the pool, she submerged her right arm and waved in the same desperate rhythm that Ikra had been floundering. Safia pulled Ikra to the wall until her face was above water. Ikra climbed down. "See, that was fine." Safia smiled and then she didn't. They sat silently, still at the edge of the deep end. Ikra has always longed to be told what she owes. Her grandmother died in childbirth. Her mother miscarried 5 times before bearing her. It seemed absurd for this to be the thing they passed on, only just surviving, only just not. The names of God that most compel her are the manifest and the hidden. If God is the formless force guiding the forward motion of the world and she does not know what forward means, God has to be made apparent in intangible ways. God has to be made apparent, else she would begin to, once again, feel the directionless discomfort of not knowing enough. It has been made clear to her that people owe their lives to one another. The driver who slows to a stop when she notices a jaywalker, and the roller coaster operator who spots an improperly fastened harness, and the cook in the back of the fast food restaurant who throws away the moldy cheese instead of poorly scraping it off, and the taxi driver who reminds his passengers to put their seatbelts on, and Ikra's mother who got to raise her, and the mother before her who tried to stop the blood. Ikra's grandmother was buried in the dry season. The mustard field across from their house grew brighter as she lay. Ikra has always longed to be told what she owes to these women, but she knows it is unquantifiable, unbounded. This is God, manifest as she understands it. Thank you.